Ever feel like we kind of slap labels on things? You know, like addiction, anxiety, even some chronic illnesses, like they're just personal problems.
Yeah, yeah.
What if we're totally missing the bigger picture?
Hmm.
Well, get ready, because today's deep dive is going to flip your perspective big time. We've got Dr. Gabor Maté as our guide.
Oh, I like him. He's brilliant.
Right. He spent his whole career digging into like the root causes of what makes us unwell.
And what's so unique about Mate is he doesn't just focus on those surface level symptoms. He digs into all the interconnected factors.
Okay, so break that down for me.
So you've got the biological stuff, right?
Yeah.
Your genes and all that. Then you've got the psychological, like your thoughts and emotions. But then Mate adds in the social, your environment, upbringing, all of it.
He's talking about how those things all intertwine and impact our well-being, right?
Exactly. It's this whole system, this web. He calls it the biopsychosocial model.
Biopsychosocial. So
Yeah.
not just nature versus nurture, but this whole other level.
Yeah, and that's a pretty different way of looking at things compared to how, like, traditional medicine or psychology often approaches it.
Right. It's like they often focus on just one piece of the puzzle at a time. So it's about seeing the whole picture, not just these isolated parts.
Exactly. It's like, imagine you're trying to figure out why a plant isn't doing well. You wouldn't just look at one leaf.
Right. You check the soil, how much light it's getting, the water, all that stuff.
Exactly. Mate's saying we need that same holistic lens when we look at people.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense. So how does he bring that lens to like something like trauma?
So what Mate argues is that trauma, and this doesn't always have to be these huge dramatic events in our lives.
It can be smaller things too.
Yes, like subtle emotional patterns, especially stuff we experience in childhood.
Okay, so those things can have a lasting impact.
He says they can, yeah, they actually shape our brains,
Wow.
which influences our stress responses, like in ways we might not even realize.
So we could be carrying around the effects of this stuff without even knowing it.
Exactly. And, Mote actually says addiction is not a choice, but a response to pain.
Whoa. Okay, hold on. Let's unpack that.
Yeah.
Because I can already see how that one sentence could be huge for someone.
Absolutely.
Someone who's struggling with addiction themselves, or even if they're judging someone else who is, to see it not as, some kind of moral failure, but like he's saying, a reaction to some deep-seated pain. That's huge.
Yeah, it really is. And, what he's challenging us to do is to look beyond the behavior itself.
Yeah.
Like what's actually going on under the
Yeah.
surface.
So are there examples of how that connection between trauma and addiction plays out? Are there examples of how that connection between trauma and addiction plays out?
Oh, tons. Maite often talks about this one patient. Seemed to have it all on the surface, successful career, loving family,
Okay.
but struggling with this really intense heroin addiction.
Oh.
And it was through working with this patient that Maite uncovered a history of abuse from childhood, stuff that had never been dealt with.
Oh, well.
And he realized the addiction wasn't some like moral failing. It was this desperate attempt to escape the pain from those early experiences.
That's so powerful and heartbreaking, to think about someone carrying that kind of invisible pain. Makes you wonder how many other people are out there struggling with something similar.
Right. And that's Mate's whole point. It's way more common than we think. And what's even more interesting is that he doesn't just stop at individual history.
Right.
He actually criticizes the systems, the structures in society that he thinks make all this worse. Like, he specifically calls out capitalism.
Capitalism. How so?
Well, think about it. This constant pressure to achieve, produce, buy more stuff.
Oh, yeah. We see that everywhere.
Right. It's everywhere. And that creates this culture of stress, always feeling like you're not good enough.
And if you're already carrying around these like unresolved traumas.
Exactly. It's like adding fuel to the fire. It can be almost impossible to bear, which is often when those unhealthy coping mechanisms come in.
Right. It's like this perfect storm, trauma, this pressure to be productive, to achieve all the time. It's no wonder people are feeling burnt out, overwhelmed. So Maté offers solutions for this, right? He doesn't just leave us in this bleak cycle.
Exactly. He talks about this three-pronged approach, addressing things on a personal level, between people, and then, yeah, the whole societal level.
Okay, so let's break those down. What does he suggest for personal healing?
So he's really big on something called compassionate inquiry.
Okay, I've heard of that, but I'm not really sure I understand what it means.
Yeah, so basically it's about gently looking at the root causes of our suffering.
So not just trying to fix the symptoms, we have to go deeper.
Right, exactly. It's not about like dwelling on the past or anything like that. It's about bringing real curiosity and kindness to our pain.
To try and understand how it might still be affecting us today.
Yes, and that's where the healing can actually begin.
Mm.
And alongside compassionate inquiry, Maté also talks a lot about mindfulness.
Like meditation.
Yeah, or even just like bringing awareness to the present moment.
To help us manage those stress responses so we're not constantly being triggered by the past.
Exactly. Learning to be present with those tough emotions without judging them.
Which I imagine is way easier said than done. But yeah, it's about that self-compassion thing. So what about the interpersonal stuff? What does he say about dealing with things like addiction or mental health in a more compassionate way?
So this is where trauma-informed care comes in. Basically, it's about shifting our perspective. Instead of asking, what's wrong with you, we start asking, what happened to you?
Ooh, that's a good one. So instead of just looking at the behavior, we're trying to understand the whole person, their story. I like that. It feels so much more humane and honestly probably more effective too.
Totally. Recognizing that everyone is dealing with stuff, past experiences that might be impacting them. And that's key if you want to provide really effective support.
Right. Okay, so I've got personal healing, compassionate interventions. Now for the big one, societal change. This is where it gets really interesting, right? It's like we're so focused on teaching kids how to, make it in the system that we forget to teach them how to actually be, well, human.
Yeah, totally. And Mate would say that speaks to this need for a bigger shift, right?
Mm.
From just being productive all the time to actually prioritizing well-being, connection. Those things matter.
Right, like those are not just buzzwords.
Exactly. And he argues, like, if we really want to address these bigger issues, addiction, mental health, even chronic illnesses, we got to create a different kind of society,
Mm.
one that actually values compassion for ourselves and each other.
So we have to go beyond just individual healing. We have to look at the bigger systems that are contributing to the problem.
Yes. And recognizing that it's not about blame, but about taking responsibility,
Hmm.
creating a world that supports healing for everyone.
Yeah, I get that. Speaking of which, you mentioned something interesting about Mate's Wikipedia entry earlier.
Oh, right. Yeah.
It said he was diagnosed with ADHD by, get this, a listener.
I know, right? It's a great story.
Talk about a meta moment. How did that happen?
So picture this. He's giving this lecture on ADHD, right?
Yeah.
Describing all the symptoms and everything.
Okay.
And afterwards, this doctor in the audience comes up to him and he's like, you basically just described yourself.
Mhm. Wow. What are the chances to be like teaching about it and have that realization? That's wild.
It is. And it's so cool that he actually shares that story so openly.
Yeah, it says a lot about him. Like, he's not afraid to be vulnerable, which, when you think about his background growing up in Nazi-occupied Hungary,
Yeah.
being separated from his mom as a baby, seeing the horrors of war firsthand, that's bound to leave a mark.
It really is.
Well,
And it just shows you trauma can impact anyone. It doesn't matter what you accomplish in life or your status, anything like that.
it's a good reminder. So as we wrap up this deep dive, what's the one thing you really hope listeners take away from Mate's work?
If I had to choose just one, I'd say it's the importance of compassion for ourselves, for others, for the world around us.
Because, like we've been talking about, so much of what we judge in ourselves and other people could actually be, like he says, rooted in these unhealed wounds.
Exactly. It's about remembering we're all human, approaching these things with curiosity, with empathy.
Rather than judgment.
Yes. And like Mate's own story shows, healing is possible. When we shed light on these things, when we can talk about them, both personally and as a society.
It gives me hope, honestly.
Me too. Because that's how we create a world where everyone can thrive.
This has been such an eye-opening conversation. I really appreciate you taking the time to break it all down. And to everyone listening, definitely check out Mate's books, his lectures, all of it. There's so much good stuff there. And as you learn more about all this, remember to be kind to yourselves. Be curious about your own experiences and hold on to that hope because a more compassionate world starts with us.